Here, Street Girl heard screams coming from a dark house and ran to alert the police. "Someone is trapped here," she said, not realizing the seriousness of what she had just reported. "What they found inside will shock you." The scorching summer heat of downtown San Francisco was unforgiving, especially for those with nowhere to go. 7-year-old Lily Morgan wiped the sweat from her brow as she carefully navigated the crowded streets, clutching a half-eaten sandwich she had found earlier that morning. Her small, weathered backpack contained all she owned in the world: a tattered stuffed rabbit missing one eye, a plastic water bottle she refilled at public fountains, and a worn blanket that served as both bed and shelter on cold nights. For almost a year now, Lily had mastered the art of urban survival. She knew which restaurant dumpsters would have the freshest discards, which park benches were least patrolled by police, and which alleyways provided the safest sleeping spots. Her dirty blonde hair hung in matted clumps around her face, and her once bright blue eyes had developed a cautious wariness beyond her years. The faded yellow dress she wore had been a lucky find in a charity donation bin, too large for her small frame, but clean enough when she first discovered it. Lily wasn't always homeless. She had fragmented memories of a small apartment, a woman's gentle voice, and the scent of cheap perfume mixed with cigarettes. But those memories had grown hazier with each passing month. A series of unfortunate events, one she didn't fully understand herself, had led to her current situation, alone on the streets of a city too busy to notice a silent child moving like a ghost through its shadows. "Hey, kid, you can't sit there," barked a security guard outside the gleaming Wilson Technologies headquarters. Lily scrambled away without a word, long accustomed to being shooed away from comfortable spots. She knew better than to argue or even speak. Invisibility was her greatest protection. 23 floors above where Lily had tried to rest, Richard Wilson stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his executive office, surveying the city that had helped make him a billionaire. At 52, his salt-and-pepper hair and trim physique gave him the distinguished look of success that business magazines love to feature on their covers. The founder and CEO of Wilson Technologies had built an empire from a small software startup he'd launched in his garage 27 years earlier. Now his company developed cutting-edge AI solutions that powered everything from smartphones to medical diagnostic systems. "Mr. Wilson, the board members are waiting in the conference room," announced his executive assistant, Melissa Chen, from the doorway. Richard nodded, straightening his custom-tailored navy suit. "Thank you, Melissa. I'll be right there." As he gathered his tablet and notes, his phone buzzed with a text from his brother, Thomas Wilson. "Don't forget dinner tonight. Margaret's been planning this for weeks." 8 p.m. sharp, Richard sighed. His younger brother's wife had been organizing these elaborate family dinners with increasing frequency, each one feeling more like a networking event than a family gathering. Thomas, as CFO of Wilson Technologies, was always eager to blend business with their personal relationship, something Richard found increasingly exhausting. "The Princeton deal looks solid," announced Bernard Hayes, VP of Strategic Development, as Richard entered the boardroom. "But there are concerns about the security protocols they're requesting." Richard took his seat at the head of the massive mahogany table. "What kind of concerns?" "They want access to our core algorithm architecture," said Janet Foster, the company's lead counsel. Her tone made it clear she disapproved. "It would expose our proprietary technology." "That's non-negotiable," Richard replied firmly. "We can offer alternative solutions, but the core stays protected." Bernard shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "They're insistent, Richard. This deal could open the European market for us in ways we've been attempting for years." "Then we'll find another way in," Richard said, his voice leaving no room for debate. "Our integrity isn't for sale, Bernard." The meeting continued for another hour, with Richard growing increasingly aware of the tension between himself and his executive team. Something felt off, particularly with Bernard and Andrew Keller, his longtime chief operations officer. Both men had been with the company for over 15 years, but lately, their visions seemed to diverge from his own. Where Richard prioritized ethical development and sustainable growth, they pushed for aggressive expansion and higher profit margins. As the meeting concluded, Richard lingered behind, watching his executives file out. Bernard and Andrew exchanged glances that didn't escape Richard's notice, a silent communication that sent an inexplicable chill down his spine. "Everything all right, Richard?" asked Janet, the last to leave. "Yes, just thinking," he replied with a reassuring smile. "Could you send me the revised contract drafts by tomorrow?" Once alone, Richard returned to his office and sank into his leather chair. The company he'd built from nothing had grown beyond his wildest dreams, but with that growth came complications he hadn't anticipated. The idealism that had fueled his early years, creating technology that genuinely improved lives, now constantly battled against shareholder expectations and market demands. His intercom buzzed. "Mr. Wilson, Dr. Patel is on line 1 about the Children's Hospital donation." Richard's mood brightened as he picked up the phone. The pediatric research wing that would bear his company's name was one of his most passionate projects, though he'd insisted on anonymity for his personal contributions. "Dr. Patel, how are the renovations coming along?" As Richard discussed the hospital project, he felt the familiar sense of purpose that had become increasingly rare in his corporate life. This was why he'd become successful in the first place, to make a difference. That evening, as Richard left the office, he declined his driver's offer to take him home. "I'll walk for a bit, Marcus. Need some fresh air. You can pick me up at Franklin and Grove in 20 minutes. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows between the buildings as Richard strolled through the financial district. He loosened his tie and removed his suit jacket, draping it over his arm. These moments of normalcy were precious to him, chances to observe the city as just another person, not as Richard Wilson, tech billionaire. Several blocks away, Lily was completing her daily routine. She'd collected 2 half-full bottles of water left behind by tourists, found a relatively clean apple core, and was now seeking a protected spot to spend the night. The cardboard box she'd been using behind the Chinese restaurant on Mason Street had been cleared away that morning, which meant starting over. As dusk approached, Lily made her way toward an abandoned building she'd discovered the previous week. Several loose boards at the back entrance provided just enough space for someone her size to squeeze through. Inside, the musty darkness was frightening, but preferable to the unpredictability of sleeping in open spaces. She carefully laid out her blanket in a corner where the roof didn't leak, placed her backpack as a pillow, and pulled out the precious half-sandwich she'd been saving. As she ate slowly, savoring each bite, she heard voices outside, adult male voices speaking in hushed, urgent tones. "The security system is bypassed. We have 45 minutes before it resets." "And you're sure he'll come? He always walks this route on Thursdays." Creature of habit. Lily froze, her survival instincts kicking in. She knew enough about the world to recognize when adults were planning something they shouldn't be. Silently, she crept toward a crack in the boarded window, peering out at the alleyway. 3 men in business suits stood in a tight circle. One of them, tall with graying hair at his temples, kept checking his watch. Another held what looked like a fancy phone with a map displayed on its screen. "There he is," whispered the third man, pointing toward the street. "Right on schedule." Lily shifted her position slightly to see who they were watching. A man in expensive-looking clothes was walking alone, seemingly lost in thought. She recognized him vaguely. The same man whose picture hung in the lobby of the big glass building where she sometimes sought shelter from the rain. The building where security guards always chased her away. What happened next occurred so quickly that Lily barely registered the sequence. The 3 men emerged from the shadows. Words were exchanged, something about needing to talk privately about the project. The well-dressed man seemed surprised but not immediately alarmed. They guided him toward the abandoned building, directly toward where Lily was hiding. Heart pounding, she scrambled backward, retreating deeper into the darkness of the building's interior. From her new hiding spot behind a fallen section of drywall, she watched as the 4 men entered. The well-dressed man now looked concerned, asking questions that the others ignored. "What is this about, Bernard?" "Andrew, this isn't funny." "It's not meant to be funny, Richard," said the tallest man. "It's about correcting a course that's gone drastically off track." Lily held her breath, pressing herself as small as possible into her hiding place. She recognized the instinct immediately. These men were predators, and both she and the well-dressed man named Richard were prey. In that moment, as the summer sun finally disappeared beyond the horizon of San Francisco, 2 vastly different worlds collided in an abandoned building. A homeless child with nothing, a billionaire with everything, and a betrayal that would irreversibly change both their lives forever. Richard's mind raced as he assessed his situation. The abandoned building was far from the well-traveled streets of downtown, its windows boarded and floors littered with debris. Bernard Hayes, his VP of Strategic Development, stood blocking the door they'd entered through. Andrew Keller, his COO, circled behind him while the third man, whom Richard now recognized as James Morrison, his former head of security, who'd resigned 6 months earlier, kept one hand inside his jacket in a posture that suggested a concealed weapon. "What exactly is this about?" Richard asked, maintaining a calm he didn't feel. 27 years of high-stakes business negotiations had taught him to never show fear, even when it coursed through his veins, as it did now. Bernard stepped forward. His usual deferential manner had vanished, replaced by a cold confidence. "The Prometheus project, Richard, or more specifically, your decision to shelve it." Richard's jaw tightened. The Prometheus project, an advanced AI system with military applications, had been Wilson Technologies' most controversial internal development. Richard had personally halted it 3 months ago after discovering its potential for autonomous weapons systems. "That project violated every ethical principle this company was founded on," Richard replied evenly. "The board agreed with me. The board doesn't understand what's at stake." Andrew snapped, his usually composed face contorted with frustration. "Do you have any idea what military contracts are worth?" "Billions, Richard. And you threw it away because of your moral qualms." James Morrison moved closer. "We've spent 15 years helping you build an empire, only for you to develop a conscience when it's time for the real payoff." Richard's gaze moved between the three men. "So what's your plan here? Threaten me until I restart a project that could lead to autonomous killing machines." Bernard's laugh was hollow. "Not quite so dramatic. We simply need your authentication codes and biometric access to the secure servers where the Prometheus files are stored." "And if I refuse?" Richard asked, though he already knew the answer. "Then you'll stay our guest until you reconsider," Andrew replied. "We've arranged for you to be traveling for the next week. Your calendar's been cleared, appropriate emails sent. No one will miss you." From her hiding spot, Lily watched the confrontation with wide eyes. She couldn't understand everything being said, but she recognized the tension, the threat of violence that hung in the air like the moments before a thunderstorm. The man they called Richard, the one in the expensive suit, was in danger. That much was clear even to her 7-year-old mind. "This is kidnapping," Richard said flatly. "You realize that, don't you? Whatever grievances you have with my business decisions, this crosses a line you can't uncross." Bernard shrugged. "We prefer to think of it as an aggressive negotiation strategy. Once we have what we need and the Prometheus project is back on track, you'll be free to go. No one needs to know about our unconventional meeting. And you expect me to just return to work afterward, pretending none of this happened?" Richard's voice dripped with incredulity. "By then it won't matter," James said, finally revealing what he'd been concealing, not a gun, but a syringe. "The new partnership with Neurocore Defense Systems will be announced, the contracts signed. You'll have a convenient change of heart that the board will attribute to your traumatic travel experience in the wilderness." Richard took a step back. "Neurocore? They're military contractors with a history of human rights violations. We've explicitly refused to work with them for years." Andrew's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Times change, Richard. The deal is practically finalized. All we need are your access codes and biometric data to complete the Prometheus files." Lily shifted slightly to get a better view, accidentally knocking over a piece of broken plaster. The sound, barely louder than a whisper, echoed in the tense silence. All 4 men froze. "What was that?" James asked, turning toward the sound. Lily held her breath, pressing herself harder against the wall, praying to become invisible as she had so many times before on the streets. "Probably rats," Bernard said dismissively. But James wasn't convinced. "I'll check it out," he said, moving toward Lily's hiding place with deliberate steps. Richard seized the moment of distraction. In one fluid motion, he grabbed a broken piece of wooden shelving from the floor and swung it at Andrew, who was closest to him. The wood connected with Andrew's shoulder, causing him to stumble backward. Richard lunged toward the door, but Bernard was faster, tackling him to the ground with surprising strength for a corporate executive. "James!" Bernard shouted, struggling to pin Richard down. "Forget the noise. Get over here." James abandoned his investigation and hurried to assist Bernard. Together they subdued Richard, who continued to fight until James plunged the syringe into his arm. Within seconds, Richard's struggles weakened. "Just a mild sedative," James explained, as Richard's eyes grew heavy. "Enough to make you cooperative, without affecting cognitive function. You need to be clear-headed to access those files." Lily watched in horror as the three men zip-tied Richard's hands and ankles, then propped him against a wall. The businessman's head lolled to one side, his eyes unfocused but still open. "I'll set up the secure connection," Andrew said, opening a laptop he'd pulled from his briefcase. "Once it's ready, we'll need his fingerprints and retinal scan, along with the verbal passcodes." Bernard nodded. "He should be suggestible enough in about 15 minutes. James, secure the perimeter. Make sure we're really alone here." James nodded and began a systematic search of the building's ground floor. Lily's heart pounded so loudly she was certain he would hear it. As his flashlight beam swept closer to her hiding spot, she squeezed her eyes shut, clutching her tattered rabbit to her chest. The light passed over her once, then returned, lingering. Through barely opened eyes, she saw James staring directly at her hiding place, his expression shifting from surprise to calculation. "Find anything?" Bernard called from across the room. James hesitated, his eyes locked on Lily's. She saw something in his face, not compassion exactly, but recognition. Perhaps he too had once been small and afraid. "Nothing but trash and rats," he finally answered, lowering his flashlight. But before turning away, he placed a finger to his lips in a universal gesture of silence, then mouthed words she could barely make out. "Stay hidden. Say nothing." Confused but desperate, Lily nodded almost imperceptibly. James returned to his colleagues, reporting the building was secure. For the next hour, Lily remained frozen in her hiding place, watching as the three men worked to extract information from Richard, who drifted in and out of lucidity. They set up equipment, made phone calls using strange devices that they claimed couldn't be tracked, and discussed their plans in fragmented conversations. "Neurocore is offering $3 billion for the completed Prometheus architecture," Bernard said at one point. "With our shares and positions in the new subsidiary they're creating, we each stand to make upwards of $200 million. Hardly seems fair considering what Richard will walk away with," Andrew commented bitterly. "Richard made his choice," Bernard replied. "He betrayed everything we built toward. 15 years of work, and he flushes it because suddenly he's worried about ethical implications. Where was his ethics when we developed facial recognition software that's now used by authoritarian regimes? Where was it when our data mining algorithms started predicting consumer behavior with frightening accuracy? He only found his moral compass when it was convenient, when he already had his billions." As night deepened, the men took shifts watching Richard and monitoring equipment. During a moment when Bernard and Andrew stepped outside to take a call, leaving James alone with their captive, Lily saw Richard's eyes clear momentarily. "Why, James?" Richard asked, his voice hoarse. "You resigned honorably. You were going to start your own security firm." James looked away. "Plans change. My wife's medical bills. Insurance wouldn't cover the experimental treatment. Neurocore offered to pay for everything if I helped with this operation." "I would have helped you," Richard said weakly. "You only needed to ask. And live with your charity." James spat. "I worked for you for 12 years, Richard. Took bullets for your company, literally in Jakarta. And when Miranda got sick, you sent flowers and a get-well card." Richard's head drooped again as the sedative reclaimed him. James checked his pulse, then moved to the laptop to review some files. Lily's legs had gone numb from maintaining her position for so long. She shifted slightly, trying to restore circulation without making noise. But her small movement dislodged a piece of debris that clattered to the floor. James's head snapped up. He rose and walked purposefully toward her hiding spot. This time there was nowhere for her to retreat. "Come out," he whispered, just loudly enough for her to hear. "Now while they're outside." Trembling, Lily emerged from behind the fallen drywall, her dirty face streaked with silent tears. James crouched to her level. "What's your name?" She said nothing, years of street survival having taught her that giving information to adults rarely ended well for her. "Listen to me very carefully," James continued, glancing toward the door where Bernard and Andrew could return at any moment. "What's happening here is wrong. I know that, but I can't stop it, not now." Lily remained silent, clutching her rabbit tighter. "If you make any noise, they'll find you, and they can't have witnesses." His voice was urgent but not unkind. "Stay hidden. When we leave tomorrow, wait at least an hour before you go. Understand?" Lily gave a tiny nod. "And if you ever tell anyone what you saw here." James's face hardened, his voice taking on an edge that made Lily shrink back. "Remember, little girl, no one believes children like you. No one's looking for you. No one would miss you. Remember that." The threat hung in the air between them, all the more terrifying for its quiet delivery. Before Lily could process it, they heard footsteps approaching. James quickly gestured for her to return to her hiding place. "I thought I heard you talking to someone," Bernard said as he re-entered the building. "Just our friend Richard here," James replied smoothly. "He's becoming more coherent. We might be able to start the access protocols soon." Outside, the San Francisco fog had rolled in, shrouding the abandoned building in a thick gray blanket that muffled sounds and blurred the boundaries between buildings. Inside, a homeless child huddled in fear. A betrayed businessman fought against chemical restraints, and 3 desperate men pursued a fortune built on weaponized technology, each locked in their own private struggle that would irrevocably alter all their lives before the fog lifted again. Dawn broke over San Francisco with painful slowness for Lily. She had dozed fitfully throughout the night, jerking awake at every sound, her small body tense with fear. The men had continued their work through the darkness, taking turns resting while always keeping watch over Richard, who they'd moved to a chair and secured more thoroughly. By morning, Richard's resistance had weakened considerably. The combination of sedatives, exhaustion, and dehydration had taken its toll. Lily watched as Bernard positioned a scanner in front of Richard's face, capturing his retinal pattern, while Andrew held his head steady. "Verbal confirmation code, Richard," Bernard prompted. "We know it's a phrase from your father's favorite book. Just say it and this ends sooner." Richard's lips remained pressed in a thin line of defiance. Andrew sighed dramatically before delivering a sharp slap to Richard's face. Lily flinched at the sound, burying her face in her stuffed rabbit. "We have all your biometric data now," Andrew said. "The verbal code is the final piece. Give it to us, and as promised, you'll be free to go once the deal is complete." Richard's voice, when it finally came, was raspy but clear. "You know I don't believe that, Andrew. The moment I'm no longer useful, I become a liability." Bernard leaned forward. "We were colleagues for 15 years, Richard. Friends even. We're not monsters." A bitter laugh escaped Richard's lips. "Tell that to the civilians who'll die from the autonomous weapons you're so eager to develop." "That's rich coming from you," Andrew snapped. "Your technology already powers surveillance systems in half the authoritarian regimes around the world. Your search algorithms help governments track dissidents. Don't pretend your hands are clean." "Which is precisely why I drew the line at Prometheus," Richard replied, a hint of his usual authority returning to his voice. "I won't add another sin to my conscience." James, who had been monitoring equipment in the corner, stood abruptly. "We're wasting time. The longer we stay here, the greater our risk of discovery. Let's just take him to the secondary location and continue there." Bernard nodded. "Agreed. Pack up the equipment. We move in 30 minutes. The news sent a jolt of panic through Lily. If they took Richard away, what would happen to him? The fragments of conversation she'd overheard made it clear these men were willing to hurt him to get what they wanted. And despite James's warning, something deep inside her couldn't accept simply hiding and doing nothing. As the men busied themselves with preparations to depart, Lily made a decision that defied every survival instinct she'd developed on the streets. She would find help for the man called Richard. The problem was, who would believe a dirty homeless child? Who would even listen? She waited until James led the others to the back of the building to prepare their vehicle, then silently crept toward the opposite exit. Years of moving invisibly through the city had taught her to step without sound, to slip through spaces unnoticed. She squeezed through the same loose boards she'd used to enter and emerged into the morning light, blinking as her eyes adjusted. The city was coming alive. Early commuters hurrying toward bus stops and coffee shops. Lily moved with purpose, staying close to buildings, avoiding eye contact with passing adults. She needed to find someone in authority, someone who would believe her. 2 blocks away, she spotted a police officer standing beside his patrol car, sipping coffee and checking his phone. Lily hesitated. Her experiences with police had been mostly negative, being shooed away from storefronts, questioned when she lingered too long in parks, occasionally threatened with social services. But what choice did she have? Drawing a deep breath, she approached the officer. "Excuse me," she said, her voice so rarely used that it came out as little more than a whisper. Officer Michael Ramirez glanced down, instinctively taking a step back from the disheveled child. "Hey there, kid. Where are your parents?" Lily ignored the question, pushing forward with desperate urgency. "There's a man." They took him. "In the old building on Fletcher Street." Officer Ramirez's expression shifted from mild annoyance to professional interest. "What man? Who took him?" "Men in suits," Lily said, struggling to explain. "They tied him up. They're hurting him." "What's your name, sweetheart?" Ramirez asked, crouching down to her level. "Lily," she answered, surprising herself. She hadn't spoken her name aloud in months. "Okay." "Lily, I need you to tell me exactly what you saw." She described the abandoned building, the 3 men, and Richard, the man from the big glass building with his picture in it. Her description was fragmented and childlike, but something in her intensity gave Ramirez pause. "Wait here," he said, returning to his patrol car to radio in. Lily heard him requesting backup to investigate a possible kidnapping. She also heard the skepticism in the dispatcher's voice. "Probably just another homeless kid making up stories, Mike." "Maybe," Ramirez responded, "but worth checking out. Send Jenkins and Torres to meet me there." He turned back to Lily. "Can you show me where this building is?" She nodded, then hesitated. "They said they're leaving soon." "Then we better hurry," Ramirez said, opening his patrol car door. "Hop in." The ride took less than 3 minutes. Ramirez parked a block away from the address Lily indicated, instructing her to stay in the car while he investigated. "Lock the doors," he told her. "I'll be right back." As soon as he disappeared around the corner, Lily unlocked the door and slipped out. She couldn't just sit and wait. Following at a distance, she watched as Ramirez approached the abandoned building cautiously, one hand resting on his holstered weapon. Inside the building, the kidnappers were making final preparations. Richard had been given another dose of sedative, enough to keep him compliant during transport. "Vehicles ready," James announced, returning from the rear entrance. "We should move now." Bernard nodded. "Help me with him." They had just gotten Richard to his feet when they heard it, the unmistakable sound of the front door being tested. "San Francisco Police." "Anyone inside?" The 3 men exchanged alarmed glances. "How?" Andrew hissed. "Who could have—" His eyes widened with sudden realization, turning to where he'd seen James searching the previous night. The noise. There was someone else here all along. James's face remained impassive. "Back exit, now. Leave everything non-essential." They half-carried, half-dragged Richard toward the rear of the building as Officer Ramirez continued calling out warnings that he was entering. The timing couldn't have been worse for the kidnappers. Just as they emerged from the back door, a second patrol car pulled up, responding to Ramirez's call for backup. "Police!" "Stop right there!" shouted Officer Torres, drawing her weapon. What happened next was chaos. Bernard and Andrew froze momentarily. James, with his security background, assessed the situation in an instant and made a cold calculation. He released Richard, who collapsed to the ground and raised his hands. "Officers, there's been a misunderstanding," James said smoothly. "We're executive security for Wilson Technologies. This is Richard Wilson, our CEO. He's had an episode." Officer Jenkins kept his weapon trained on the men. "Everyone on the ground, hands where I can see them." Bernard and Andrew complied immediately, but panic had overtaken their practiced corporate composure. "It's not what it looks like," Bernard pleaded. "We were helping him." Officer Ramirez had circled around from the front of the building, taking in the scene with experienced eyes. The zip ties still visible on Richard's wrists, the sedated state of the supposed CEO, the abandoned equipment visible through the open door. None of it matched James's story. "Detain all 3, Ramirez ordered his colleagues, "and call an ambulance for the victim." As the officers secured the kidnappers, Lily watched from behind a dumpster across the street. Her small heart pounded with a mixture of fear and something unfamiliar pride. She had done something that mattered. She had helped someone. The paramedics arrived minutes later, carefully loading Richard onto a stretcher. As they wheeled him toward the ambulance, his eyes fluttered open, gaze wandering across his surroundings in confusion until they locked onto a small figure watching from the shadows. For a brief moment, through the haze of sedatives and exhaustion, Richard Wilson, billionaire tech mogul and captain of industry, made direct eye contact with Lily Morgan, homeless 7-year-old survivor. Neither could have possibly known how profoundly that moment would change both their lives. As the ambulance doors closed, Lily slipped away. She'd risked enough for one day. The streets were familiar, and they called her back to the relative safety of anonymity. By noon, the news had spread throughout San Francisco's business community. Richard Wilson, founder and CEO of Wilson Technologies, had been kidnapped by his own executives in a shocking corporate betrayal. The story dominated local headlines, with reporters gathering outside the Wilson Technologies headquarters and the hospital where Richard had been taken. Thomas Wilson, Richard's brother and company CFO, pushed through a crowd of journalists to enter the hospital, his face a mask of concern that didn't quite reach his calculating eyes. "My brother is resting comfortably," he announced to the press after visiting briefly. "The doctors assure me he'll make a full recovery. Wilson Technologies is cooperating fully with authorities, and we're conducting our own internal investigation into this unprecedented breach of trust." What Thomas didn't share publicly was the conversation he'd just had with his brother. Richard, still groggy but increasingly lucid, had insisted on speaking to the police officer who had found him. "Officer Ramirez," Richard had said when the policeman entered his hospital room, "I understand I owe you my life." "Just doing my job, Mr. Wilson," Ramirez replied modestly. "Tell me, how did you know where to find me?" "My kidnappers were careful to cover their tracks." Ramirez shifted uncomfortably. "Sir, you might find this hard to believe, but we received a tip from a homeless child, a little girl named Lily. She led us right to you." Richard's expression had transformed immediately, urgency replacing fatigue. "This girl, where is she now?" "I'm afraid she disappeared during the commotion. We've been looking for her to take a formal statement, but—" Ramirez shrugged helplessly. "Street kids are good at not being found when they don't want to be." "Find her," Richard had insisted, gripping Ramirez's arm with surprising strength. "Please, I need to thank her personally." Now, as Thomas handled the media circus outside, Richard lay in his private hospital room, staring at the ceiling. His body was still processing the last of the sedatives, but his mind was remarkably clear. In his 47 years of life, he'd never owed his safety, his very life, to anyone else. The irony wasn't lost on him. A man worth billions had been saved by a child who had nothing. "I need to find her," he whispered to the empty room. Across the city, Lily had returned to her routine of survival. She'd found a new cardboard box behind a different restaurant and was setting up her makeshift home when a breaking news alert on a television visible through a bar window caught her attention. There on the screen was the man she had helped rescue. His corporate headshot displayed next to footage of the abandoned building surrounded by police tape. "Billionaire CEO Richard Wilson kidnapped by own executives in plot involving military technology." Lily stared, transfixed. The man had a name, a life, a story far beyond what she could have imagined, and for a brief moment, their stories had intersected. She turned away, pulling her blanket tighter around her shoulders as the evening fog rolled in. Tomorrow would be another day of searching for food, avoiding authorities, and surviving the indifference of a city that never saw her. But for the first time in nearly a year, Lily fell asleep with something new warming her chest, the knowledge that she had mattered, that her existence had made a difference to someone else. It was a dangerous feeling for a child who had learned that hope often led to disappointment, yet she couldn't help but nurture it as she drifted into dreams where she wasn't invisible anymore. Richard Wilson was discharged from the hospital 3 days after his rescue, against medical advice, but with enough private nursing care arranged to satisfy his doctors. The sedatives had finally cleared his system, leaving him physically exhausted but mentally sharp, and singularly focused on finding the child who had saved him. "You don't understand," Richard explained to Detective Sarah Lawson, who had been assigned to lead the kidnapping investigation. They sat in his penthouse apartment overlooking the bay, the afternoon sun streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows. This girl risked everything to help me. A complete stranger. I need to thank her, to make sure she's safe. Detective Lawson, a 20-year veteran of the force with a no-nonsense demeanor, flipped through her case notes. Mr. Wilson, we have officers looking for her, but finding one specific homeless child in San Francisco is like finding a particular grain of sand on a beach. Officer Ramirez described her as small blonde, approximately 7 years old, wearing a yellow dress too large for her. That matches dozens of children in the city's homeless population. Richard paced, ignoring the lingering dizziness from his ordeal. Then we expand the search. I have resources, security personnel, technology. With all due respect, Lawson replied carefully, throwing money and manpower at this might do more harm than good. Street children are naturally wary of adults, especially those who seem to be hunting for them. If word gets out that the famous Richard Wilson is looking for a specific homeless girl, she might go deeper into hiding, or worse, someone might try to pass off another child as her for potential reward money. Richard stopped pacing, considering her words. What do you suggest? Let us continue our discreet inquiries. Officer Ramirez has contacts at shelters and soup kitchens. In the meantime, she added, closing her notebook, I need to focus on building the case against your former executives. Their arraignment is tomorrow, and we're still unraveling the extent of their conspiracy. After Detective Lawson left, Richard stood at his windows, gazing down at the city sprawled below. Somewhere out there was a child who had saved him when she had nothing to gain and everything to lose. The thought consumed him, making his spacious penthouse feel suddenly empty and meaningless. He picked up his phone. Marcus, bring the car around, and call Thomas. Tell him to meet me at headquarters in an hour. 90 minutes later, Richard sat across from his brother in the Wilson Technologies executive boardroom. Thomas Wilson had stepped in as acting CEO during Richard's absence, a role he seemed reluctant to relinquish even after his brother's return. You should be resting, Thomas said, his concern sounding genuine, even as his eyes darted to the stack of contracts awaiting signatures. The company is stable. The board has issued statements of full support. The stock took a minor hit when the news broke, but it's already rebounding. I'm not here about the company, Richard replied. I need your help with something personal. Thomas raised an eyebrow. That's a first. The brothers had always maintained a relationship that was more professional than personal. Their 12-year age gap and fundamentally different personalities, creating a distance that neither had truly attempted to bridge. Where Richard was visionary and idealistic, Thomas was practical and traditional. Where Richard sought to change the world, Thomas sought to maintain the status quo profitably. I want to find the child who alerted the police to my kidnapping, Richard explained. A homeless girl named Lily. Thomas's expression shifted to one of confusion. Why? Because she saved my life. Because she's 7 years old and living on the streets. Because I owe her. Thomas leaned back, studying his brother with newfound curiosity. And what exactly do you intend to do when you find her? Write her a check? Give her a tour of the company? What? Richard hesitated. He hadn't thought that far ahead, which was unusual for a man who typically planned 5 moves in advance. I don't know yet, but I need to find her first. Well, the company's security resources are at your disposal, of course, Thomas said, though I agree with the detective. A high-profile search might be counterproductive. I was thinking we could access the city's surveillance network, Richard suggested. Our facial recognition software could— Absolutely not, Thomas interrupted firmly. Using our proprietary technology to scan for a specific child without proper authorization would be illegal, not to mention an ethical nightmare. Imagine the headlines. Tech billionaire uses invasive surveillance to track child. Is that really what you want? Richard fell silent, acknowledging the valid point. Besides, Thomas continued more gently, this fixation isn't healthy, Richard. You've been through a traumatic experience. It's natural to feel a connection to someone involved in your rescue, but this isn't trauma bonding, Thomas, Richard cut in sharply. This is about a child who needs help and my ability to provide it. And what about the thousands of other homeless children in this city? Do they deserve your personal attention too? Where does it end? Thomas sighed, softening his tone. I'm not saying don't help her. I'm saying be careful about making this too personal. You have responsibilities that extend beyond one child, no matter how deserving. The conversation ended without resolution, leaving Richard frustrated and Thomas concerned. As Richard left the building, he found himself looking more carefully at the people huddled in doorways, the figures sleeping on benches, the shadows moving through alleyways. His city had always contained these elements of human suffering, but they had existed at the periphery of his vision, acknowledged but not truly seen. Meanwhile, Lily continued her daily survival routine, unaware of the search being conducted for her. The events surrounding Richard's rescue had frightened her enough that she'd moved to a different area of the city, away from her familiar territory near the financial district. She now spent her days around Dolores Park, where tourists frequently left behind partially eaten food, and where the more liberal neighborhood residents sometimes offered her direct handouts. A week after the rescue, Lily was scavenging near a row of trendy cafes when she noticed a police officer showing her photograph to shopkeepers. The image, a still frame captured from Officer Ramirez's body camera during their brief interaction, sent a bolt of fear through her. James's threat echoed in her mind. No one believes children like you. No one would miss you. Had the men somehow escaped? Were they looking for her? Or were the police blaming her for something? Lily ducked behind a dumpster, heart racing, then fled as soon as the officer entered a coffee shop. She ran until her lungs burned, finally collapsing in an isolated corner of the park, hidden by overgrown bushes. For the next several days she became even more cautious, moving only at night and avoiding all uniformed authorities. Richard, meanwhile, grew increasingly frustrated with the officials' search efforts. Despite his substantial donation to the SFPD's community outreach program, a transparent attempt to prioritize the search for Lily, results remained elusive. 2 weeks after his rescue, he decided on a different approach. "I want to volunteer," he announced to Sister Maria at St. Anthony's dining room, a soup kitchen serving the Tenderloin district. The elderly nun looked up from the pot she was stirring, her expression cycling rapidly from surprise to suspicion to careful neutrality as she recognized the famous face before her. "We appreciate volunteers, Mr. Wilson," she said slowly, "but we typically require training and a regular commitment, not publicity appearances." Richard removed his expensive watch and rolled up the sleeves of his simple button-down shirt. "I'm not here for publicity. No cameras, no press. I can commit to 3 days a week for the foreseeable future. And I have an ulterior motive I won't hide from you. I'm looking for someone." Sister Maria's eyes narrowed slightly. "We don't facilitate finding people who may not wish to be found, Mr. Wilson." "It's a child," Richard clarified quickly. "A homeless girl named Lily, about 7 years old. She saved my life, and I believe she may be in danger because of it." The nun's expression softened marginally. "The little girl from the news. The one who reported your kidnapping." Richard nodded. "Even if she comes here, I couldn't simply hand her over to you." "I don't expect you to," Richard assured her. "I just want to be here if she comes in, to have a chance to thank her and offer help if she wants it." Sister Maria studied him for a long moment, then handed him an apron. "Kitchen duty starts at 5 a.m. Don't be late." For the next 3 weeks, Richard split his time between running his company and serving food at St. Anthony's. He worked alongside ex-cons, recovering addicts and retired school teachers, all of whom initially regarded him with suspicion that gradually gave way to grudging respect as he showed up consistently and worked without complaint. Richard found himself transformed by the experience in ways he hadn't anticipated. He learned the names and stories of regular patrons, many of whom had once led conventional lives before mental illness, addiction, or simple bad luck had left them on the streets. He witnessed the dignity with which many carried their circumstances and the casual cruelty society often inflicted upon them. "Still no sign of your little girl?" asked Sister Maria one evening as they cleaned up after dinner service. Richard shook his head. "I'm beginning to think Detective Lawson was right. Maybe she's gone deeper into hiding because people are looking for her. Or maybe," Sister Maria suggested gently, "she's not coming to places where she might be recognized because she doesn't want to be found." The thought hadn't occurred to Richard. Why wouldn't she want help? Trust is a luxury many street children can't afford, Sister Maria explained. In their experience, adult interest usually leads to systems that fail them: foster care, juvenile detention, institutions. Even well-intentioned help often comes with conditions they can't or won't meet. Richard considered this as he wiped down tables. So what do I do? Give up? I didn't say that, Sister Maria replied. But perhaps instead of searching so hard for one child, you might consider creating something that would help many children, including her, when she's ready. The idea took root in Richard's mind, growing and evolving over the following days. He consulted with child welfare experts, visited existing youth shelters, and researched models for helping homeless children that focused on their agency and choices, rather than forcing them into systems they feared. 4 weeks after beginning his search, Richard called a meeting with his personal legal team and the Wilson Family Foundation directors. I want to establish a new type of shelter, he announced without preamble. One specifically designed for children who don't trust traditional systems. No mandatory reporting to social services unless the child consents. No requirement to provide identification or background. Safe harbor, food, education, medical care, all available without preconditions. Eleanor Jennings, his longtime foundation director, looked skeptical. Richard, what you're describing skirts several legal requirements for child welfare. We can't just harbor minors without... Then we find workarounds, Richard interrupted. Create a legal framework that protects these children while respecting their autonomy. I'm not interested in why it can't be done. I need solutions for how it can. The legal team exchanged glances. We could structure it as a research program, suggested Alan Peterson, his chief counsel. A pilot initiative studying alternative approaches to youth homelessness. That would give us some flexibility within existing regulations. Whatever it takes, Richard said firmly. I want locations in every district with significant homeless populations, walking distance from areas where these children already congregate. And I want the first one operational within 30 days. 30 days, Eleanor exclaimed. That's impossible. The permits alone. Make it happen, Richard insisted. Money is no object. Neither is my personal involvement. This is now my top priority. As the team dispersed with their assignments, Thomas lingered behind. This has become an obsession, Richard, he said quietly. You've barely been in the office. The board is starting to ask questions. Let them ask. It's not just the board. The prosecutor called yesterday. Pernod and Andrew are considering plea deals. They're claiming you knew more about the Prometheus project applications than you've admitted publicly. That you only shut it down when there was risk of exposure. Richard's jaw tightened. They're lying to save themselves. Of course they are, Thomas agreed. But perception matters. You disappearing from public view to serve soup to the homeless, and now launching some legally questionable shelter for street kids. It's feeding into their narrative that you're having some kind of breakdown or crisis of conscience. I don't care how it looks, Richard said, though a part of him recognized the potential damage to everything he'd built. You should, Thomas pressed. Because if they manage to paint you as unstable or compromised, everything is at risk. The company, your position, your ability to do any good at all, including for this girl you're so determined to help. Richard knew his brother had a point. His public image had always been an asset. The visionary founder, the ethical tech leader, the principled billionaire. If that image crumbled, his influence would diminish accordingly. What do you suggest? He asked finally. Balance, Thomas answered. Continue your project, but maintain your corporate responsibilities. Make a public statement about your experience and how it's inspired you to address youth homelessness. Frame it as an extension of your existing philanthropic work, not a radical departure or personal crusade. Richard nodded slowly. I can do that. And Richard, Thomas added as he turned to leave, have you considered what happens if you never find her? Or if you do find her and she doesn't want your help? Are you prepared for either possibility? The question lingered in Richard's mind, long after his brother departed. The truth was he wasn't prepared. In all his planning and resource allocation, he had never seriously contemplated failure. The thought that Lily might not want to be found, or worse, might fear him, was almost too painful to consider. Yet as he stood at his office windows that evening, watching the city lights emerge against the darkening sky, he made himself face the possibility. If he never found her, would all this effort be wasted? The answer came with unexpected clarity. No. Whether Lily specifically benefited or not, creating safe spaces for children like her was inherently worthwhile. Perhaps his fixation on finding her had been in part about assuaging his own guilt or gratitude, but the mission itself had grown beyond that now. "I'll still look for you, Lily," he whispered to the glittering cityscape. "But even if I never find you, I promise your courage won't be forgotten." Across the city, huddled in a new hiding place beneath a highway overpass, Lily clutched her worn stuffed rabbit and tried to ignore the gnawing hunger in her stomach. She had seen her face on a newspaper someone had discarded alongside Richard Wilson's, and the fear had driven her even further from her usual territories. The search that was meant to help her had instead forced her deeper into the shadows, away from the few resources she knew how to access. As rain began to patter on the concrete above her, Lily closed her eyes and tried to remember what it felt like to be warm, to be safe, to be seen, not as a problem or a project, but simply as a child worthy of care. The Wilson Emergency Youth Shelter opened with little fanfare on a quiet street in the Mission District, just 6 weeks after Richard first conceived the idea. The renovated 3-story Victorian had once been a boutique hotel, but now featured dormitory-style rooms upstairs, communal spaces on the main floor, and a kitchen that operated around the clock. The only indication of its wealthy benefactor was a small brass plaque by the entrance that read Lily House, a name that carried significance only to Richard himself. Remember, Richard instructed the carefully selected staff during their final orientation. No child is turned away, regardless of circumstance. No mandatory reporting unless there's imminent danger or the child consents. No police on premises without a warrant. These kids need to know this is truly a safe harbor. Dr. Elena Vasquez, the child psychologist Richard had recruited to oversee the shelter's operations, nodded in agreement. "We've trained everyone on trauma-informed approaches, Mr. Wilson, but I want to reiterate that building trust will take time. We can't expect immediate results." Richard knew she was right, but impatience gnawed at him nonetheless. 2 months had passed since his rescue, and despite all his efforts, Lily remained unfound. The shelter was his most tangible attempt to create a space where she might eventually appear, drawn by the promise of safety without the entanglements of traditional social services. "I understand," he replied. "I'm committed to the long game here." That evening, as the shelter prepared to open its doors for the first time, Richard insisted on being present. He'd chosen casual clothing, jeans and a simple sweater that wouldn't immediately mark him as wealthy, but his presence still created a palpable tension among the staff. "Perhaps it would be better if you weren't here tonight," Dr. Vasquez suggested diplomatically. "Your presence, however well-intentioned, might intimidate the very children we're trying to reach. Many of them will recognize you." Richard wanted to argue, but knew she was right. His face had been plastered across news outlets for weeks, first for his kidnapping and rescue, then for the subsequent trial of his former executives, who had ultimately accepted plea deals in exchange for reduced sentences. "I'll observe from the office," he compromised, indicating the small room off the main entrance that had a one-way window overlooking the reception area. As darkness fell, the first children began to arrive, tentatively at first, then in growing numbers as word spread through the invisible network that connected the city's homeless youth. By midnight, 14 children between the ages of 8 and 17 had sought refuge at Lily House. Each was given food, a shower if they wanted one, clean clothes, and a secure place to sleep, all without demands for identification or threats of system involvement. Richard watched from behind the one-way glass, his heart breaking anew with each child's arrival. Their faces told stories of hardship and survival that no child should have to experience. Some arrived with bravado and suspicion, others with the quiet defeat of those who had learned to expect little from the world. None of them was Lily. "This is just the beginning," Dr. Vasquez reminded him when she found him still watching at 2 a.m. "Word will spread. More will come." Richard nodded, exhaustion finally overtaking his vigilance. "Call me if a small blonde girl in a yellow dress arrives," she finished with gentle understanding. "I know." Over the following weeks, Richard divided his time between his corporate responsibilities and his new mission. Thomas had been right about the importance of maintaining his public image. Richard made strategic appearances at board meetings and industry events, gave a carefully crafted interview about his ordeal and recovery, and ensured that Wilson Technologies remained visibly under his leadership. But each night found him at Lily House, sometimes serving meals, sometimes simply observing from his office. The shelter quickly reached its capacity of 30 children per night, with a rotating population as some returned to the streets during the day and others moved on entirely. "We're making a difference," Dr. Vasquez assured him one evening as they reviewed the week's statistics. 17 children have allowed us to connect them with medical care. 4 have agreed to meet with education specialists. 3 have consented to us contacting relatives who might provide more stable housing. "But not her," Richard said quietly. "No," the psychologist acknowledged. "Not yet." As the shelter's first month of operation concluded, Richard expanded the program, opening a second location in the Tenderloin district and beginning renovations on a third near Golden Gate Park. Each was staffed with trauma specialists, educators and security personnel trained to protect without intimidating. Each operated on the same principle of voluntary engagement without institutional entanglement. And each bore the same simple brass plaque, Lily House. The shelters quickly became a subject of both praise and controversy. Child welfare advocates applauded the innovative approach that reached children who typically avoided traditional services, while some government officials criticized the lack of integration with existing systems. Richard weathered the debates with calm determination, leveraging his influence and resources to shield the program from interference. 3 months after the first shelter opened, Richard was reviewing architectural plans for the 4th location when his private phone rang, a line known only to a select few. "Mr. Wilson," came Dr. Vasquez's carefully controlled voice, "I believe you should come to the Tenderloin location as soon as possible." Richard's heart leaped. "Is it—" "I can't confirm over the phone," she interrupted, "but please come immediately." He arrived at the shelter 20 minutes later, having broken several traffic laws en route. Dr. Vasquez met him at a private entrance, her expression both excited and cautious. "She came in about an hour ago," the psychologist explained as she led him to her office. "She matches the description, blonde, approximately 7 years old, though severely undernourished, which makes age estimation difficult." "She didn't give a name, but—" "But?" Richard prompted, his voice strained with anticipation. "She's carrying a stuffed rabbit missing one eye. And she asked if this was the place the man from the glass building made for kids like her." Richard stopped walking, overwhelmed by emotion. "It's her. It has to be." Dr. Vasquez placed a restraining hand on his arm. "Mr. Wilson, Richard, I need you to listen carefully. This child, whoever she is, has been living on the streets for an undetermined period. She's malnourished, showing signs of possible exposure-related illness, and extremely wary of adults. If this is indeed your Lily, your reaction to seeing her could either help or severely traumatize her further." Richard took a deep breath, forcing himself to think beyond his own emotional response. "What do you suggest? Let me introduce you as a shelter volunteer. Don't mention recognizing her or knowing anything about her past. Let her control the interaction and the information she shares." Richard nodded, swallowing his impatience. "Whatever's best for her." Dr. Vasquez led him to a small room designed for one-on-one counseling sessions. Through a window in the door, Richard could see a tiny figure sitting at a table, hunched protectively over a bowl of soup. The child's blonde hair was matted and dull, her skin weathered by sun and dirt. She wore mismatched clothes that hung from her thin frame, and clutched a filthy stuffed rabbit to her chest with one hand, while spooning soup with the other. It was Lily, older, more worn than in his memories, but unmistakably the child who had saved him. "Ready?" Dr. Vasquez asked, studying his face. Richard nodded, though his racing heart suggested otherwise. They entered the room together, with the psychologist speaking first in a calm, cheerful tone. "Hey there! How's the soup?" Lily looked up warily, her eyes moving between Dr. Vasquez and Richard. "It's good," she said softly, her voice raspy from disuse. "I'm glad. This is Richard. He volunteers here sometimes, helping with meals and things." Richard moved slowly to a chair across from Lily, maintaining a non-threatening distance. "Hello," he said simply, fighting to keep his voice steady. Lily studied him with intense scrutiny, and Richard could see the moment. Recognition dawned in her eyes. She stiffened slightly but didn't flee. "I know you," she said finally. "From the building." Richard nodded, unsure if she meant his corporate headquarters or the abandoned building where he'd been held captive. "You're the man they tied up," Lily clarified, answering his unspoken question. "Yes," he acknowledged, "and you're the brave girl who got help." Lily's grip on her stuffed rabbit tightened. "They said they'd hurt me if I told." "I know," Richard said gently. "What you did was incredibly brave. You saved my life." The child looked down at her soup, shoulders hunching further. "I didn't know who to believe. They said you did bad things, but you were tied up and looked scared." Richard's heart ached at her confusion. Even in her fear, this child had made a moral judgment, had chosen to help someone she perceived as vulnerable despite threats to her own safety. "You made the right choice," he assured her. "The men who took me were trying to make me do something dangerous, something that could hurt a lot of people. You stopped them." Lily absorbed this information with the solemn wisdom of a child who had seen too much of the world's darkness. "Is that why you made these places? The Lily houses?" The question caught Richard off guard. "You knew they were named after you?" She shrugged one small shoulder. "I heard people talking on the streets. They said a rich man was looking for a girl named Lily and making special places for kids." "Yes," Richard admitted. "I wanted to find you, to thank you, and to help you if you wanted help." "Why?" The directness of the question, childlike in its simplicity but profound in its implications, momentarily stunned Richard. "Because," he began, then paused to organize his thoughts. "Because you helped me when you had absolutely no reason to. Because no child should have to live on the streets. Because I have the ability to help, and that creates a responsibility." Lily considered this, taking another spoonful of soup before responding. "Those men, the ones who took you, are they going to hurt me?" "No," Richard said firmly. "They're in prison. They can't hurt you or anyone else now." The visible relief that washed over Lily's face made Richard realize how heavily this fear had been weighing on her. For months, she had been hiding not just from the usual dangers of street life, but from the specific threat of retaliation. "Would you like to stay here, Lily?" Dr. Vasquez asked gently. "You'd have your own bed, regular meals, clean clothes. No one would make you do anything you don't want to do. You could leave any time." Lily looked around the room, then at Richard, her young face showing the calculation of a child accustomed to evaluating survival options. "Do I have to tell my real name? Or where I came from?" "No," Dr. Vasquez assured her, "though someday when you trust us more, it might help us understand how best to keep you safe." Lily nodded slowly. "I can stay tonight, maybe tomorrow too." "That's a good start," the psychologist smiled, standing. "Let me show you where you'll sleep. And we can find some clean clothes that fit better." As they prepared to leave, Lily paused at the door, turning back to Richard with an expression that seemed too old for her young face. "Thank you," she said simply, "for looking for me. Nobody's ever looked for me before." The words hit Richard like a physical blow. After they left, he remained seated, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what had just transpired and the responsibility he now faced. This child, resilient, brave, and profoundly alone in the world, had trusted him enough to reveal herself after months of hiding. What came next would require more than money or resources. It would require a commitment to her as an individual, not just as a symbol or a cause. Thomas found him still sitting there an hour later, having been alerted by Richard's driver about the unexpected detour. "I got worried when you missed the investor call," Thomas explained, taking in his brother's emotional state with a raised eyebrow. "Is everything all right?" Richard looked up, a complex mixture of emotions playing across his face. "I found her, Thomas. I found Lily." Thomas's expression shifted from irritation to surprise. "The girl from the kidnapping? She's here?" "Yes, malnourished, traumatized, afraid, but alive. And somehow still capable of trust after everything she's been through." "That's good news," Thomas said carefully. "So what happens now?" "Mission accomplished." Richard shook his head. "This isn't the end. It's barely the beginning." He stood, newfound determination in his voice. "I want to give her a home, Thomas. A real home. Not just a shelter, not just financial support. I want to adopt her His brother stared at him in disbelief. Adopt her? Richard, you can't be serious. You know nothing about this child, her background, her family situation. For all you know, there are relatives searching for her. If there are, we'll find them, Richard replied firmly. But from what little she's shared, I suspect there's no one. And I won't abandon her to a system that's already failed her once. Thomas ran a hand through his hair in exasperation. You're talking about completely upending your life for a child you just met. Have you thought this through? The legal complications alone. I've made up my mind, Richard interrupted. I'll need your support, not your objections. The brothers stared at each other across a widening ideological divide, one that had been growing for years, but now seemed unbridgeable. In this moment, Richard recognized a fundamental difference between them, not just in their business philosophies, but in how they viewed their obligations to others, particularly those without power or privilege. You'll have my support, Thomas finally said, his tone suggesting it was a concession rather than an endorsement. But I hope you understand what you're getting yourself into. Richard thought of the tiny girl with the one-eyed rabbit who had risked everything to save a stranger. I'm beginning to, he said softly, and it might be the most important thing I've ever done. Lily stayed at the shelter for 3 weeks before she stopped disappearing during the day. It took another 2 weeks before she would sleep through the night without checking that all exits were accessible. By the 6th week, she had begun to join the educational activities Dr. Vasquez organized, revealing an eager mind behind her cautious exterior. Richard visited daily, careful to maintain the role of volunteer rather than benefactor. He brought books he thought she might enjoy, sat with her during meals, and gradually earned enough of her trust that she began to share fragments of her history, though never her full name or how she had ended up on the streets. I had a mum once, she told him one afternoon as they sat in the shelter's small garden, a protected courtyard, where the children could enjoy fresh air without feeling exposed. Lily was carefully coloring a picture of a house with a red door and flowering trees, a far cry from any home she had likely known. She was sick a lot. I think she died, but I don't remember exactly. Richard listened, giving her the space to share at her own pace. That must have been very hard for you. Lily shrugged with the resigned acceptance that broke his heart each time he witnessed it. Lots of kids don't have moms. Or dads. That's true, Richard acknowledged. But everyone deserves to have someone who cares about them, who looks out for them. She glanced up from her drawing, studying him with eyes that had seen too much for their years. Is that why you come here every day? Because you care about us. I care about all of you, Richard said honestly. But especially you, Lily. You did something extraordinary for me, something most adults wouldn't have had the courage to do. She returned to her coloring, adding a yellow sun to the corner of the page. I just did what seemed right. That's what makes it extraordinary, Richard replied softly. Later that evening, Richard met with Dr. Vasquez and Alan Peterson, his legal counsel, in the shelter's office. I've begun the preliminary process, Alan explained, opening a folder of documents. But establishing guardianship, let alone adoption of a child with no documented identity, presents significant challenges. We would typically need to demonstrate that reasonable efforts have been made to locate existing family. She's been living on the streets for at least a year, possibly longer, Richard countered. If anyone was looking for her, they would have found her by now. The law doesn't recognize abandonment as easily as you might think, Alan continued patiently. Without knowing her legal name or having a birth certificate, we can't even determine jurisdiction for filing. Was she born in California? Another state? Is she even a U.S. citizen? These questions matter legally. Dr. Vasquez, who had been quietly listening, leaned forward. Lily has begun to trust us, but she's still protective of her full identity. Pushing her for that information could undo months of progress. Richard nodded in understanding. So what do we do? We establish a foundation of trust and stability first, the psychologist advised. Continue building your relationship in this safe environment. Eventually, with enough security, she may feel comfortable sharing the details we need. And in the meantime, Richard pressed, impatience edging his voice. In the meantime, Alan replied, we can pursue temporary emergency guardianship based on her current status as an unaccompanied minor in your care. It's not adoption, but it would give you legal standing to make certain decisions for her welfare, while we work on the more permanent solution." Richard agreed to this approach, though the delay chafed at his natural inclination toward direct action. Throughout his life, he had overcome obstacles through determination and resources. But Lily's trust couldn't be earned through either. It required patience, consistency, and time. Over the next month, a routine developed. Richard would arrive at the shelter each afternoon, often bringing simple puzzles or games that engaged Lily's quick mind. They would talk, sometimes about trivial things like favorite colors or foods, other times about deeper matters that emerged unprompted from Lily's experiences. Why do some people have so much when others have nothing? She asked him one day as they worked on a jigsaw puzzle featuring a world map. The question, philosophical in its simplicity, gave Richard pause. "That's a complicated question," he began carefully. "Some of it has to do with where and when people are born. Some has to do with opportunities and choices. And some of it has to do with systems that aren't always fair." Lily considered this as she fitted a puzzle piece, representing Australia, into place. "You have a lot." "Yes," Richard acknowledged. "I do." "Did you work hard for it?" "I did," he said. "But I also had advantages many people don't have. I had a good education, people who believed in me, and some luck along the way." Lily nodded thoughtfully. "I work hard too, to survive, but I don't have a lot." The observation, delivered without self-pity, struck Richard deeply. "That's why I think those of us who have more should help those who have less. It makes the world more fair." She smiled then, a rare, genuine smile that transformed her small face. "Is that why you made the lily houses?" "Partly," Richard admitted. "But mostly I made them because of you. Because you showed me how brave one person can be, even when they have nothing to gain." These conversations strengthened the bond between them, but they also reinforced Richard's determination to give Lily a permanent home. By the third month, he had converted a spare bedroom in his penthouse into a child's room, filling it with books, art supplies, and comfortable furniture, all waiting for the day Lily might occupy it. That day seemed to be approaching when, during her 4th month at the shelter, Lily finally shared her full name with Dr. Vasquez during a counseling session. "Lily Morgan," she said quietly. "That's my real name. My mom was Amber Morgan. I think we lived in Portland before we came here, but I'm not sure. I was little then." This information, while limited, gave Alan Peterson's team enough to begin searching birth records and tracking down Lily's origins. The investigation moved slowly, but within 2 weeks they had located a birth certificate for Lillian Grace Morgan, born to Amber Morgan in Portland, Oregon, 7 years earlier. The father was listed as unknown. Further research uncovered a death certificate for Amber Morgan from 14 months prior, a suspected overdose. With no father in the picture and no record of other relatives, Lily had apparently been on her own since then, falling through the cracks of an overloaded child welfare system. "This actually simplifies things legally," Alan explained to Richard. "With documented evidence that her only known parent is deceased and no record of other family, we can petition for permanent guardianship with a clearer path to adoption." Richard felt a complex mixture of emotions: sorrow for Lily's loss, anger at the system that had failed her, relief that the legal path forward was clearer, and hope for the future they might build together. That evening, he approached the subject with Lily for the first time, sitting beside her on a bench in the shelter's garden as the setting sun cast long shadows across the courtyard. "Lily," he began gently, "you've been here at the shelter for a while now." She nodded, picking at a loose thread on her new jeans. In the months since arriving, proper nutrition and regular medical care had already made a visible difference in her appearance. Her blonde hair now shone with health, her cheeks had lost their hollow look, and her eyes carried less of the haunted wariness that had initially defined them. "Do you like it here?" Richard asked. "It's nice," she replied. "Safe, warm, the food's good." "What if," Richard continued carefully, "there was another place you could live? A permanent home?" Lily looked up sharply, alarm crossing her features. "You mean like foster care, or an orphanage?" "No," Richard hastened to reassure her. "I was thinking of something else. What if you came to live with me? In my home?" Lily stared at him, clearly processing this unexpected suggestion. Why would you want that? The question was so genuine, so devoid of guile, that it momentarily left Richard speechless. In Lily's experience, adults didn't simply offer homes without expecting something in return. "Because I care about you," he said finally. "Because I want to make sure you're safe and happy and have everything you need to grow up strong and smart, which you already are." "Would I have to call you Dad?" she asked, the question revealing one of her concerns. "No," Richard replied. "You can call me Richard. We would start as friends, just like we are now. The only difference would be where you sleep at night, where you eat your meals. And over time, if we both wanted it, maybe we could become a family. But there's no rush and no pressure." Lily considered this, her young face serious with contemplation. "Would I still be able to visit the shelter? And see Dr. Elena?" "Of course." "As often as you want." Would I have to go to school? With other kids?" Richard nodded. "Eventually, yes. But we would find a school where you'd feel comfortable, where they would understand what you've been through and help you adjust at your own pace." Lily fell silent again, looking out at the garden with its carefully tended flowers and vegetable patch that the shelter children helped maintain. "Can I think about it?" she asked finally. "Take all the time you need," Richard assured her, though his heart raced with hope at what wasn't an outright refusal. 2 days later, Lily approached Richard as he was helping serve dinner at the shelter. "I talked to Dr. Elena about your idea," she said matter-of-factly. "She said it might be good for me." Richard tried to contain his excitement. "And what do you think?" "I think," Lily hesitated, then continued with careful deliberation, "I think I'd like to try. Maybe just for a little while at first. To see." Richard nodded, respecting her cautious approach. "That sounds very sensible. We could start with a visit this weekend. You could see the apartment, the room that would be yours. If you like it, maybe you could stay a night or two, and then we'd go from there." "Okay," Lily agreed, then added with the pragmatism of a child who had learned to anticipate problems, "But if I don't like it, I can come back here, right?" "Absolutely," Richard promised. "This place will always be here for you, no matter what." The weekend visit went better than Richard had dared hope. Lily was initially overwhelmed by the luxury of his penthouse apartment. The floor-to-ceiling windows, the spacious rooms, the state-of-the-art kitchen where a personal chef had prepared their meal. But the room he had created specifically for her won her over immediately. "This is all for me?" she asked in wonder, taking in the colorful bookshelf filled with children's classics. The art table by the window, the comfortable window seat with cushions and a basket of stuffed animals. "All for you," Richard confirmed. "Though we can change anything you don't like." Lily spent most of that first visit exploring the room, testing the bed for bounciness, examining each book, and arranging and rearranging the stuffed animals. By Sunday evening, when it was time to return to the shelter, she asked the question Richard had been hoping for. "Could I maybe stay here tomorrow night? Just to try sleeping here?" Richard's heart soared. "I think that could be arranged." One night turned into 2, then 3, then a full week. By the end of the month, Lily was spending 5 nights at Richard's apartment and weekends at the shelter, an arrangement that allowed her to maintain the security of her familiar environment while gradually transitioning to her new home. It was during this period that the first signs of opposition emerged. Thomas Wilson had initially kept his reservations to himself, supporting his brother's legal efforts, while privately doubting the wisdom of the arrangement. But as Richard's commitment to Lily deepened and the legal process of guardianship advanced, Thomas's concerns found voice. "The board is getting nervous." "Richard," he reported during a tense meeting in Richard's office, "your attention has been divided for months now. The Porter acquisition is stalling, the European expansion is behind schedule, and our stock price has dipped 8% in the last quarter. All temporary setbacks," Richard dismissed. "The fundamentals of the business remain strong." "It's not just about the numbers," Thomas pressed. "It's about perception. You've always been the visionary, the public face of Wilson Technologies. Now you're increasingly absent, distracted. People notice." "I'm balancing my responsibilities," Richard insisted. "The company remains my professional priority." Thomas leaned forward, lowering his voice, though they were alone. "And what about the girl's background? We still know very little about her mother, nothing about her father. What if relatives emerge once the adoption makes headlines? What if there are complications in her history that could reflect poorly on you, on the company. Richard's expression hardened. Her name is Lily, and her background, whatever it may include, is not a corporate liability to be managed. She's a child who needs a home. I'm just asking you to consider all angles, Thomas replied, raising his hands in a placating gesture. This isn't just about you anymore. It affects shareholders, employees, our entire corporate ecosystem. The conversation ended unresolved, but it marked the beginning of a subtle campaign of resistance. Thomas began scheduling critical meetings during times he knew. Richard had commitments with Lily. Board members privately expressed concerns about Richard's changing priorities. Questions about succession planning emerged in executive sessions. Richard was aware of these maneuvers but refused to be diverted from his path. With Alan Peterson's guidance, he filed for legal guardianship of Lily Morgan, initiating a process that would eventually lead to adoption. The court assigned a guardian ad litem to represent Lily's interests and scheduled hearings to evaluate Richard's suitability as her permanent guardian. Throughout this period, Richard was careful to shield Lily from the legal complexities and corporate tensions. In her presence, his focus remained entirely on helping her adjust to her new life, enrolling her in a specialized school for children with trauma backgrounds, engaging a child nutritionist to address years of dietary neglect, and spending quality time together each evening reading, playing games, or simply talking about their days. Lily, for her part, blossomed under this attention. Her vocabulary expanded rapidly, her natural intelligence finding expression in an insatiable curiosity about the world. She still had moments of regression, hiding food in her room, waking with nightmares, occasionally retreating into wary silence when overwhelmed. But the general trajectory was one of healing and growth. Then came the day that would test the fragile, a foundation they had built together. Richard had just returned from a court hearing where the guardian ad litem had recommended approval of his guardianship petition, paving the way for eventual adoption. He entered his apartment, eager to share the good news with Lily, only to find Margaret Wilson, Thomas's wife and Lily's frequent babysitter, when Richard had unavoidable business commitments, waiting for him with a grave expression. "Where's Lily?" he asked immediately, anxiety sharpening his tone. "In her room," Margaret assured him. "She's fine. But Richard, there's something you need to know." She handed him a tablet displaying an article from a tabloid news site, Tech Billionaire's Charity Case, the troubled past of Richard Wilson's street urchin. The article contained details about Amber Morgan's history of drug abuse and prostitution, insinuations about Lily's unknown paternity, and unfounded speculation about potential developmental issues resulting from prenatal drug exposure. Worst of all, it featured a grainy but recognizable recent photo of Lily entering Richard's building, her face only partially obscured, despite laws protecting minors' privacy. "How did they get this information?" Richard demanded, voice shaking with barely controlled fury. "These records were sealed by the court." Margaret looked away, unable to meet his eyes. "Thomas believes someone in Alan's legal team may have leaked it. Possibly someone who felt the board should know what you were getting into." The implication was clear. Thomas hadn't merely objected to Richard's decision. He had actively undermined it, using confidential information about a vulnerable child to generate negative publicity that might pressure Richard into reconsidering. "Where is he?" Richard asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "At the office," Margaret replied. "Richard, he's concerned about you, about the company." He thought exposing a traumatized child to public scrutiny was acceptable corporate strategy. Richard interrupted coldly. "I need to check on Lily." He found her sitting on the window seat in her room, clutching her one-eyed rabbit and staring out at the city below. She turned as he entered, and the wariness that had receded in recent months was back in full force. Margaret's phone kept ringing, she said quietly. "People asking about me, about my mom." Richard sat beside her, maintaining a respectful distance. "I'm so sorry, Lily. Some not very nice people wrote a story about us without permission, and they said things they shouldn't have." "True things," Lily whispered. "About my mom." "The bad things she did." Richard's heart broke at the shame in her voice. "Your mother was sick, Lily. She had an illness that made it hard for her to take care of herself or you. That wasn't your fault." None of it was your fault. Lily looked down at her rabbit, picking at its worn fur. The story said you only want me for pictures in newspapers. To look nice to people. The accusation, pulled directly from the tabloid's insinuations, struck Richard like a physical blow. That is absolutely not true, he said firmly. I want you in my life because of who you are, Lily. Because you're brave and smart and kind, even after everything you've been through. I want to give you a home because every child deserves one, especially a child as extraordinary as you. Lily studied his face, searching for deception, with the keen insight of a child who had learned to detect adults' lies as a survival skill. Whatever she saw there must have reassured her because she nodded slowly. What happens now? She asked. It was the question that had been haunting Richard since he saw the article. The exposure could complicate the guardianship process, invite unwanted scrutiny, potentially even threaten Lily's sense of security and privacy. Now, he said, making a decision in that moment, we face this together. The people who matter know the truth about you, about us. The rest, he shrugged. The rest don't get to define who we are or what we mean to each other. Lily considered this, then scooted closer to him on the window seat, a small gesture of trust that meant more than any words could have. Can I still stay here? She asked, the vulnerability in her voice revealing her deepest fear. Always, Richard promised, gently placing his arm around her small shoulders. This is your home now, Lily, for as long as you want it to be. As they sat together watching the sunset paint the San Francisco skyline in shades of gold and pink, Richard's phone buzzed repeatedly with calls from Thomas, from the PR department, from board members concerned about the company's image. He ignored them all, focusing instead on the child beside him, a child who had saved him in more ways than one, and who now needed him to stand as firmly for her as she had once stood for him. The courthouse corridors echoed with hushed conversations as Richard and Lily waited outside the family court judge's chambers. 6 months had passed since their first meeting at the shelter, 4 months since Lily had begun living with Richard full-time, and 2 months since the tabloid exposure that had transformed their private journey into a public spectacle. Lily sat beside Richard on a wooden bench, her legs dangling above the floor, dressed in a simple blue dress that she had chosen herself for this important day. Her blonde hair was neatly braided, and she clutched her ever-present one-eyed rabbit, freshly cleaned but still unmistakably worn from years of love. Nervous? Richard asked gently. Lily nodded, her eyes fixed on the heavy wooden doors that would soon open for their guardianship hearing. Me too, Richard admitted, a confession that earned him a surprised glance from the child. In her experience, adults rarely acknowledged vulnerability. What if they say no? She whispered, giving voice to the fear that had grown stronger as the hearing approached. Richard chose his words carefully, balancing honesty with reassurance. Then we appeal. We try again. We don't give up. Before Lily could respond, the doors opened and a court officer appeared. The judge will see you now. They entered the judge's chambers, a less intimidating setting than a formal courtroom, but still sufficiently formal to make Lily press closer to Richard's side. Judge Eleanor Winters, a stern-faced woman in her 60s with steel-grey hair and piercing eyes, sat behind a massive desk. Also present were Ms. Farnsworth, Lily's court-appointed guardian ad litem, Alan Peterson, Richard's attorney, and a woman Richard didn't recognize, who was introduced as Rebecca Simmons, representing the Department of Children and Family Services. Please be seated, Judge Winters directed, her tone businesslike but not unkind. Once everyone was settled, she addressed Lily directly. Hello, Lily, I'm Judge Winters. Do you know why we're all here today? Lily nodded solemnly. To decide if I can stay with Richard. That's right. And I want you to know that everyone in this room has the same goal, to do what's best for you. Sometimes adults might disagree about what that means, but that's the purpose we all share. Do you understand? Yes, ma'am, Lily replied softly. The judge turned her attention to the gathered adults. This case has attracted considerably more attention than most guardianship petitions. Let me be clear from the outset. I'm not interested in media narratives, corporate considerations, or public relations concerns. My only interest is the welfare of this child. She shuffled through the papers before her. Mr. Peterson, please present your client's petition. Alan outlined Richard's request for permanent legal guardianship, emphasizing his financial stability. his commitment to Lily's well-being, and the strong bond that had developed between them. He detailed the specialized education, therapy, and support services Richard had arranged, as well as the home environment he had created. Miss Farnsworth spoke next, describing her observations of Lily's progress in Richard's care. She has shown remarkable improvement in all developmental areas. Her academic assessments indicate she's catching up quickly to grade-level expectations, despite her disrupted early education. Most importantly, she demonstrates appropriate attachment to Mr. Wilson and clear signs of emotional security in his presence. It was Ms. Simmons who introduced the first note of skepticism. While the department acknowledges the material advantages Mr. Wilson can provide, we have concerns about his suitability as a guardian, given his professional commitments. Mr. Wilson is CEO of a major corporation requiring significant time and travel. Furthermore, he has no experience with children, no family support system actively involved in Lily's care, and a lifestyle that may not easily accommodate the needs of a developing child. Richard felt a familiar frustration rising, but kept his expression neutral, conscious of Lily watching for his reaction. Additionally, Ms. Simmons continued, we question whether proper procedures were followed in identifying potential biological relatives. Our department would typically conduct a more exhaustive search before considering non-relative placement. Judge Winters nodded thoughtfully. Mr. Peterson, would your client like to address these concerns? Richard leaned forward, speaking with the measured conviction that had served him well in boardrooms and investor meetings. Your Honor, regarding my professional commitments, I've restructured my work schedule significantly over the past 6 months. I no longer travel internationally without Lily accompanying me. I'm home each day by 5 p.m., and I've delegated operational responsibilities to allow me to be fully present for her. He continued, as for experience, you're right. I had none before Lily came into my life. But I've compensated through education, parenting classes, trauma-informed care training, regular consultations with child development specialists. I'm not trying to do this alone. I've built a support network specifically for Lily's needs. The judge made notes, then addressed Ms. Simmons. Regarding the search for biological relatives, has your department conducted its own investigation? We have, Your Honor. We found no verifiable living relatives on the maternal side. The paternity remains unknown despite database searches. Judge Winters turned to Lily, who had been listening with the intense focus children often bring to adult conversations about their fate. Lily, I'd like to speak with you privately for a few minutes. Would that be all right? Lily glanced at Richard, who gave her an encouraging nod. Can I bring Mr. Rabbit? She asked, raising her stuffed animal slightly. A hint of a smile softened the judge's stern features. Mr. Rabbit is definitely welcome. The adults were asked to wait outside while Judge Winters spoke with Lily alone. In the corridor, Richard paced nervously while Alan attempted reassurance. Judge Winters has a reputation for fairness, the attorney said. She'll see how much progress Lily has made in your care. Richard was about to respond when the elevator doors at the end of the corridor opened, revealing Thomas Wilson. Richard stiffened immediately. What are you doing here? He demanded as his brother approached. Supporting you, Thomas replied, though his tone lacked conviction. How's it going? As if you care, Richard said coldly. After what you did, Thomas cut him off. I didn't leak those documents, Richard. I may have had concerns about this situation, but I would never expose a child to that kind of publicity. Then who did? Richard challenged. The information came from somewhere, and a remarkably small circle had access. Before Thomas could answer, the chamber doors opened, and the court officer summoned them back inside. Lily was seated where they had left her. Mr. Rabbit clutched tightly to her chest, her expression unreadable. Judge Winters waited until everyone was settled before speaking. I've reviewed all the documentation thoroughly, heard from each representative, and most importantly, spoken with Lily herself. She looked directly at Richard. Mr. Wilson, your petition presents unusual circumstances. You have no prior connection to this child, beyond the extraordinary incident that brought you together. You have no parenting experience, and your professional life is demanding by any standard. Richard felt his heart sink as the judge enumerated these points against him. However, she continued, What you lack in traditional qualifications, you have compensated for with dedication, resources, and genuine commitment to Lily's well-being. The Guardian ad litem reports significant positive development in Lily's emotional and physical health. The department, while raising valid concerns, has not identified viable alternatives that would better serve her interests. The judge shuffled her papers, then looked up again. There is also the matter of Lily's wishes, which I am bound to consider given her age and apparent maturity. She has expressed a clear desire to remain with you. Mr. Wilson, she describes feeling safe and seen in your care, words that carry significant weight from a child with her history. Hope began to rise in Richard's chest. Therefore, I am granting your petition for permanent guardianship of Lily Morgan, subject to quarterly home visits by Ms. Farnsworth for the first year and continued therapeutic support for Lily, as recommended by her care team. Relief washed over Richard so powerfully that he momentarily closed his eyes, steadying himself with a deep breath. When he opened them, he found Lily looking at him with a tentative smile that asked a question she was afraid to voice. "It's official," he told her softly. "You're staying with me." The smile that bloomed across her face was like sunrise breaking through clouds, radiant and full of promise. Judge Winters wasn't quite finished, however. "Mr. Wilson, a final word. This child has experienced significant trauma and loss in her young life. She has demonstrated remarkable resilience, but her healing journey is ongoing. Your commitment today must be unwavering, regardless of corporate pressures, personal challenges, or public opinion. Do you understand the gravity of the responsibility you're accepting?" "I do, Your Honor," Richard replied with complete conviction. "Completely and without reservation." Judge Winters nodded, satisfied. "Then I wish you both the very best. This court is adjourned." As they exited the chambers, Lily slipped her small hand into Richard's, a gesture of trust that moved him more deeply than any corporate achievement ever had. They walked past Thomas without stopping, though Richard acknowledged his brother's presence with a curt nod. Outside the courthouse, a small group of reporters had gathered, alerted to the hearing's significance. Richard had prepared for this, arranging for his car to be waiting at a private entrance, but the main doors were closer, and he was reluctant to make Lily walk the longer route. As they emerged, camera flashes erupted, and journalists called out questions. "Mr. Wilson, how does it feel to be granted guardianship? Lily, are you happy to stay with Mr. Wilson?" Richard placed a protective arm around Lily's shoulders, guiding her toward the waiting car, neither of them responding to the barrage of inquiries. Just as they were about to reach the vehicle, a man stepped forward from the crowd, a face Richard recognized with shock. "Mr. Wilson," said James Morrison, the former security chief who had participated in his kidnapping and was now serving his sentence under house arrest as part of his plea deal. "A word, please." Richard instinctively pulled Lily closer. "You shouldn't be here, James." Lily, recognizing the man from that terrifying night, pressed against Richard's side. "I'm not here to cause trouble," James said quickly, his voice low. "I'm here to apologize to both of you." He glanced at Lily, genuine remorse in his eyes. "I threatened you that night, told you no one would believe you, that no one would miss you. I was wrong." "I'm sorry." Lily stared at him silently, neither accepting nor rejecting the apology. "My court-mandated therapy is working, I think," James continued with a self-deprecating smile. "I've been following your story, the shelters, the guardianship. You're doing good things, Mr. Wilson. Things I should have supported instead of—" He trailed off, aware of Lily's presence. "Thank you for the apology," Richard said stiffly, "but we need to go." James nodded, stepping back. "Of course. Just wanted you to know she proved me wrong that night. Proved a lot of people wrong. That kind of courage. It deserves to be recognized." As they drove away from the courthouse, Lily remained quieter than usual, processing the encounter and the significance of the day's events. "Are you okay?" Richard asked gently. She nodded, then asked, "Is he still a bad man? The one who held you in the building?" Richard considered his answer carefully. He did something very wrong. He's being punished for it. But people are complicated, Lily. Sometimes they do bad things but still have good inside them. Sometimes they can change. "Like my mom?" Lily asked softly. "She did bad things too." Your mom loved you, Richard said with certainty. She was sick and couldn't take care of you the way she wanted to. That's different from choosing to hurt someone. Lily absorbed this, then changed the subject with the natural resilience of childhood. Since the judge said I can stay with you forever, does that mean I can paint my room purple like I wanted? Richard laughed, grateful for the shift to lighter concerns. I think that can be arranged. We'll pick up paint samples tomorrow. That evening, after Lily had gone to bed, Richard sat in his home office reviewing documents for an upcoming board meeting. A soft knock at the door interrupted his concentration. He looked up to find Lily standing in the doorway in her pajamas, Mr. Rabbit tucked under one arm. "Can't sleep?" he asked, setting aside his tablet. She shook her head, padding across the room to stand beside his chair. "I was thinking about something." "What's that?" "The judge called you my guardian, but—" She hesitated, gathering courage. "What am I supposed to call you now?" The question caught Richard unprepared. They had never discussed this specific aspect of their relationship, both of them content with using first names during the uncertain months of transition. "Well," he said carefully, "you can keep calling me Richard if that feels right to you, or—" He paused, not wanting to pressure her. "If someday you wanted to call me something else, that would be okay too." Lily nodded thoughtfully. "I don't remember my real dad. I don't think I ever met him." "I know," Richard acknowledged. "So I don't really know what dads are supposed to be like," she continued, her analytical mind working through the problem. "But I think maybe they're supposed to keep you safe and help you learn things and make sure you have what you need." "That sounds about right," Richard agreed, a lump forming in his throat. "And they're supposed to love you, even when you make mistakes." "Especially then," Richard confirmed. Lily looked up at him, her blue eyes serious in her small face. "You do all those things." Richard nodded, not trusting himself to speak. "So maybe," Lily said, the words coming slowly as she tested them, "I could call you Dad. Not right away. But maybe soon when I'm used to the idea." Richard blinked back unexpected tears. "I would be honored, Lily. Whenever you're ready. There's no rush." She smiled, satisfied with this resolution, then surprised him by climbing onto his lap and leaning against his chest, the most physically demonstrative she had ever been. "I'm glad the judge said I could stay." Richard wrapped his arms gently around her, marveling at the trust implied by this simple act. "Me too, Lily, more than you can possibly know." They sat together in comfortable silence for several minutes before Richard realized Lily had fallen asleep, her breathing deep and even. Carefully, so as not to wake her, he carried her back to her room and tucked her into bed, placing Mr. Rabbit beside her. As he stood in the doorway watching her sleep, Richard reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point. 6 months earlier, he had been a different man. Successful by conventional measures, but increasingly disconnected from what truly mattered. A random act of violence had thrust him into the path of a child who had nothing, yet had risked everything to help a stranger. And in saving him, she had unknowingly saved herself as well. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. The board meeting would likely be contentious, with Thomas and his allies questioning Richard's commitment to the company. The media would continue to seek angles on their story, some supportive, others exploitative. The path of raising a traumatized child would include setbacks alongside the triumphs. But tonight, watching Lily's peaceful sleep, Richard knew with absolute certainty that he was exactly where he needed to be, doing exactly what he was meant to do. For the first time in his adult life, success had a new definition, one measured not in stock prices or technological breakthroughs, but in the growing trust of a child who had every reason to trust no one. He closed Lily's door softly and returned to his office, where Thomas's latest email awaited his response. The subject line read, "Urgent CEO Succession Planning Discussion." Richard smiled grimly as he opened the message. His brother's timing was predictable, launching this challenge immediately after the guardianship was finalized. The corporate battle ahead would be fierce, with Thomas leveraging Richard's new family responsibilities as evidence of divided focus. But Richard had never been more clear-eyed about his priorities, and never more determined to protect what mattered. He began typing his response, the words coming with the conviction of a man who had rediscovered his purpose. "Thomas, I'll attend your meeting. But understand this, I have no intention of stepping aside. What I've gained isn't a distraction from my vision for Wilson Technologies. It's a clarification of it. I built this company to make a difference in the world. I now understand more deeply what that truly means. I look forward to discussing how these values will shape our future direction." He sent the email, then closed his laptop. Tomorrow's battles could wait. Tonight belonged to the quiet victory of a family forged not through blood, but through courage, compassion, and choice, the most powerful bonds of all. 5 years later, the auditorium of the newly completed Lilly Foundation Center for Youth Development buzzed with anticipation as hundreds of attendees found their seats. The building, an architectural marvel of warm wood, abundant natural light, and thoughtfully designed spaces, represented the culmination of 5 years of determined work, not just in construction, but in reimagining how society could better serve its most vulnerable children. Backstage, 12-year-old Lily Wilson adjusted her navy blue blazer and checked her note cards one final time. Her blonde hair, now worn in a stylish bob, framed a face that had retained its seriousness, but lost the wariness that had once been its defining characteristic. In 5 years, she had grown from a malnourished street child into a confident, academically gifted preteen with a passion for social justice that both impressed and occasionally challenged her father. "Nervous?" Richard asked, approaching with 2 bottles of water. Lily accepted one with a smile. "A little. There are a lot of people out there." "You've spoken to crowds before," he reminded her. "Not this many, and not for something this important." Richard nodded in understanding. The grand opening of the Foundation's headquarters was indeed significant, not just as a building, but as the hub of a nationwide network of youth shelters, educational programs, and advocacy initiatives that had already changed thousands of lives. "Remember," he said gently, "you don't have to do this. I can handle the speech alone if you'd prefer." Lily shook her head firmly. "No, this started with us. It should be both of us today." The confidence in her voice filled Richard with pride. 5 years of stability, therapy, education, and unconditional love had worked wonders, though the journey hadn't always been smooth. There had been nightmares, trust issues, occasional regressions, and the inevitable challenges of adapting to school and social relationships after years of isolation. But through it all, Lily's fundamental resilience had amazed everyone around her. The adoption had been finalized 3 years earlier, making official what had already been true in their hearts. Lily had chosen to take the Wilson name, a decision she had made with characteristic thoughtfulness. "Morgan was my mom's name," she had explained to Richard. "I'll always remember her. But Wilson is my future." A stage manager approached, clipboard in hand. "5 minutes, Mr. Wilson." Richard thanked her, then turned back to Lily. "Ready for this?" "As ready as I'll ever be," she replied with a small grin. "Dad." The term still brought a rush of emotion, even after years of regular use. In some ways, their relationship had developed like any other parent-child bond, filled with homework help, driving to after-school activities, negotiations about screen time, and the 1,000 daily interactions that form a family. In other ways, it remained unique, shaped by their extraordinary beginning and the challenges they had overcome together. When their names were announced, they walked onto the stage side by side, greeted by enthusiastic applause. Richard recognized many faces in the crowd: business leaders, politicians, celebrities, and philanthropists who had supported the Foundation's work. But more meaningful to him were the less famous attendees: shelter directors, social workers, educators, and most importantly, children and families whose lives had been touched by the Foundation's programs. Richard approached the podium first, adjusting the microphone before speaking. "5 years ago, my life changed in ways I could never have imagined," he began. "Many of you know the basic story: how I was kidnapped by former colleagues, how a homeless 7-year-old girl risked her safety to alert authorities, and how that brave act led not only to my rescue, but to the creation of the Lily House shelters." He paused, his gaze sweeping across the attentive audience. "What you may not know is how profoundly that experience transformed my understanding of privilege, responsibility, and human potential. Before meeting Lily, I believed my greatest contribution to society was through technology, creating products and services that improved efficiency, connectivity, and convenience. I still believe in that work, but I now understand that true impact isn't measured in market share or stock prices, but in human lives improved, potential unlocked, and futures reclaimed. Richard gestured to the building around them. This center represents a new approach to supporting vulnerable youth, one that respects their agency, addresses their trauma, and provides pathways to stability without forcing them into systems that have historically failed them. In the 5 years since opening our first shelter, we've served over 12,000 children across 18 cities. 83% of those who have engaged with our longer-term programs are now in stable housing situations. 91% have either returned to school or completed educational equivalency programs. He continued with more statistics and milestones, acknowledging key partners and supporters. Then, with evident pride, he introduced Lily. But none of this would exist without the courage of one child who, despite having every reason to distrust adults, chose to help a stranger in need. My daughter, Lily Wilson. The audience applauded warmly as Lily stepped forward. She took a deep breath, glancing at her note cards before setting them aside. 5 years ago, she began, her voice clear and steady, I was living in an abandoned building, searching through trash for food and hiding from anyone who might notice me. I was invisible, or at least I tried to be. When people did see me, it was usually to chase me away or tell me to go somewhere else. Nowhere felt safe. No one seemed trustworthy. She paused, her composure impressive for her age. Tonight I heard someone calling for help. My first instinct was to stay hidden. That was how I'd survived so far. But something about those cries made me take a risk I'd never taken before, to believe that I could make a difference, that my actions mattered. Richard watched his daughter with a mixture of amazement and gratitude. They had prepared this speech together. But hearing her deliver it, witnessing her transform her painful past into purposeful advocacy, moved him deeply. What happened next changed everything, Lily continued. Not just because I found a home and a father, though that changed my life completely, but because I learned that even the smallest, most overlooked person can change the world around them through one brave choice. She gestured toward the audience. The Lily Foundation exists because of that lesson. Every child, regardless of their circumstances, deserves to be seen, not as a problem to be solved, but as a person with gifts, potential, and the capacity for courage. Every child deserves safety, education, and the chance to dream beyond survival. For the next several minutes, Lily spoke about specific programs the Foundation had developed, trauma-informed shelter spaces designed with children's input, educational initiatives that accommodated interrupted schooling, legal advocacy for unaccompanied minors, and reunification support for families in crisis. I was lucky, she concluded. I found one person who saw me completely and was willing to change his life to give me a home. Not every child will have that specific path, but every child deserves a system that values them, resources that support them, and adults who believe in them. That's what this building represents, not just a headquarters, but a promise to see, hear, and stand beside the children society too often overlooks. The audience rose in a standing ovation as Richard joined Lily at the podium, his arm gently around her shoulders. As the applause continued, he leaned down to whisper, "You were magnificent." She smiled up at him, eyes bright with emotion. We did this together. The remainder of the opening ceremony included a ribbon cutting, tours of the facility, and a reception where Lily charmed donors and policymakers alike with her articulate passion for the Foundation's mission. Richard observed with quiet pride as she navigated the social complexities with growing confidence, a far cry from the silent, frightened child who had hidden in shadows just 5 years earlier. As the event wound down, Richard found himself in conversation with Governor Eleanor Winters, the same woman who, as a family court judge, had granted his guardianship petition years before. She had since moved from the judiciary to politics, becoming a fierce advocate for child welfare reform. "Your daughter is remarkable," the governor observed, watching Lily across the room where she was deep in conversation with a group of teenage shelter residents who had been invited to the opening. "Hard to believe she's the same frightened child I interviewed in my chambers. She surprises me every day," Richard acknowledged. "Her resilience, her intelligence, her compassion, especially for other children in situations like hers. "And what about your brother?" Governor Winters asked, changing the subject with the directness that had characterized her judicial style. "I understand there's been significant restructuring at Wilson Technologies." Richard nodded, his expression neutral. "Thomas remains on the board, but stepped down as CFO 2 years ago. We found a more productive relationship as family than as direct colleagues." This was a diplomatic description of what had actually been a difficult corporate battle. Following the guardianship hearing, Thomas had indeed launched his campaign to question Richard's leadership, citing his new family responsibilities as evidence of divided focus. The resulting boardroom conflict had ultimately led to a reconfiguration of executive roles, with Thomas taking a less operational position that better suited both his skills and the brothers' strained relationship. "And the company?" the governor pressed. "Thriving," Richard replied with genuine satisfaction. "We've refocused our mission and values, divested from several ethically questionable applications of our technology, and actually increased both market share and profitability. It turns out that purpose-driven leadership is good business." Governor Winters smiled. "I'm not surprised. Your testimony during the legislative hearings on child welfare reform last year was pivotal in getting the bill passed. You've developed quite a reputation as a corporate leader with an authentic social conscience." "I had an excellent teacher," Richard said, glancing meaningfully toward Lily. As the event concluded and the last guests departed, Richard found Lily sitting alone in one of the center's courtyards, a peaceful garden space designed as a sensory refuge for overstimulated children. She was perched on a bench beneath a flowering cherry tree, looking thoughtful. "Everything okay?" he asked, joining her. "Just thinking," she replied, "about how much has changed. And how some things haven't changed at all." "What do you mean?" Lily gestured toward the shelter wing of the building, visible through the courtyard's glass walls. Inside, several children could be seen receiving intake services, new arrivals being welcomed with the careful, trauma-informed approach the Foundation had pioneered. "There are still so many kids like I was," she said quietly. "We've built all this, and it's good. It helps. But the problem is so big." Richard nodded, understanding her frustration. Despite their best efforts, child homelessness and vulnerability remained systemic issues requiring far more than even the most well-funded foundation could address alone. "Change takes time," he said gently, "especially big change. But every child who finds safety here is a victory worth celebrating." Lily leaned against his shoulder, a gesture that had become natural over the years but still reminded Richard of how far they'd come from the days when any physical contact made her flinch. "I know," she acknowledged. "I just want to do more." Richard smiled at her ambition, so characteristic of the determined spirit that had led a 7-year-old to brave terrible danger to help a stranger. "We will," he promised. "This is just the beginning. And when you're older, you'll carry this work even further than I can imagine." Lily sat up straighter, her expression brightening with a new thought. "Dad, remember how we talked about expanding the education program? I was thinking, what if we created a special track for kids who've missed a lot of school but are trying to catch up? Something that doesn't make them feel stupid for being behind, but helps them build confidence while they're learning." Richard listened as she outlined her idea with increasing animation, adding details and addressing potential challenges with the analytical thinking that had become her trademark. This was the pattern of their relationship. Lily's perspective as a former street child, complementing Richard's resources and influence. Creating solutions neither could have developed alone. "I think that's an excellent idea," he said when she finished. "Let's talk to the education team tomorrow and start developing it." "Really?" Lily asked, her eyes lighting up. "Really," Richard confirmed. "Your insights have guided this foundation from the beginning. Why would we stop now?" As they walked together through the now quiet building toward the exit, where their driver waited, Richard reflected on the winding path that had led them to this point. The kidnapping that had seemed like the worst moment of his life had ultimately led to its greatest blessing. The child who had saved him had in turn been saved, and in the process had helped create a system to save thousands more. Outside, the San Francisco fog was rolling in, shrouding the city in a familiar gray blanket. Lily looked up at the Foundation's sign, her name in simple, dignified letters above the entrance. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I hadn't been in that building that night?" Xiaoxi asked suddenly. "If I hadn't heard you, or if I'd been too scared to get help?" Richard considered the question seriously. "Sometimes. I imagine I would have eventually escaped or been found. But I wouldn't have met you, wouldn't have understood what I was missing in my life, wouldn't have seen how much work needed to be done for children like you. So in a weird way," Lily mused, "those bad men kidnapping you ended up doing a lot of good." Richard laughed at her pragmatic assessment. "I wouldn't give them that much credit. But yes, something valuable came from that terrible experience. That's often how life works. Our darkest moments can lead to unexpected light." As they settled into the car for the drive home, Lily yawned, the day's excitement finally catching up with her. "I think the opening was a success," she said sleepily. "A tremendous success," Richard agreed. "You should be very proud." "We should be proud," she corrected him, her eyes already closing as she leaned against the car's comfortable leather seat. "We did it together." Richard watched as she drifted toward sleep, this extraordinary child who had become his daughter, his purpose, his most profound legacy. Their story had begun with a cry for help in the darkness, his voice her courage. It had continued through challenges and triumphs, healing and growth, building not just a family, but a movement that was changing lives across the country. And it was still being written, each day bringing new opportunities to extend the circle of impact outward. From one desperate night in an abandoned building to a nationwide foundation, from a homeless child and a kidnapped executive to a family bound by something stronger than blood, their journey had come full circle, transforming not just their own lives, but countless others along the way. As the car navigated the familiar route home through the foggy San Francisco streets, Richard thought about the path ahead. Lily would continue to grow, bringing her unique perspective and fierce determination to whatever challenges she chose to tackle. The foundation would expand its reach, refining its methods based on research and results. And he would continue to balance his corporate responsibilities with his deepest commitment, being the father this remarkable child deserved. In the end, the greatest lesson of their shared journey was perhaps the simplest, that transformation begins with seeing, truly seeing another human being in their moment of vulnerability. Richard had been seen by Lily when he was at his most helpless. She had been seen by him when she was at her most invisible. And from that mutual recognition had sprung a bond that had changed not just their lives, but the world around them. As Lily slept peacefully beside him, Richard whispered a promise he had first made 5 years earlier and renewed each day since. "I see you. I'm here always." And in the quiet of the car, surrounded by the fog that wrapped the city in its gentle embrace, that promise felt like the most valuable thing he had ever created, more lasting than any technology, more meaningful than any business success, more transformative than anything he had imagined possible before a brave child had shown him what courage truly meant.